We're speaking today with Congressman John Garamendi. He is a senior member of the Armed Services Committee. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Now, I know you just returned from Europe. You were there last night speaking with NATO officials. What did you discuss?
We held a 3-day meeting in Brussels with the parliamentarians from all 30 of the NATO countries. And I must tell you, it was very, very important to watch the solidarity, to watch these countries all come together and say, we cannot and we will not tolerate Russia invading Ukraine. And furthermore, we're going to bolster our own NATO defenses. Just a year ago, NATO was in total disarray. After 4 years of Trump, which he had done everything he possibly could to tear down NATO and really to destroy it, NATO came back together very, very quickly. It's hard to imagine that here in 2022, we would see 1939 all over again. This is a major European war for no good reason at all, other than Putin's own megalomania. And so here we are. We're going to have to be very, very solid in our alliances.
So it looks like the alliances are solid. A lot of countries shoring up their own borders, but we're not seeing a lot of action when it comes to the alliance coming in to actually protect Ukraine at this point.
Well, the NATO alliance is one of self-defense. It is not an offensive alliance. It is a self-defensive alliance. And in fact, the Article 5, which is the defense part of it, has only been used once, and that's when the United States was attacked at 9/11. And all of NATO countries came together and worked with us for 20 years in Afghanistan. We're now facing a different threat. This is the threat of I would say, a crazed autocrat in the Kremlin. Putin is acting very, very strange. So I would expect that we will see solidarity. Also, the European Union, much to my surprise, because it's very difficult for them to do anything, even before the announcement that NATO was going to shore up its defenses in the eastern NATO countries of the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and that area, the European Union came together with some very strong sanctions immediately, and there will be more following. The president is today meeting with the G7. These are the other big world economies, and the entire world, except for China and Russia, are coming together to push back on what is a totally unnecessary, ill-conceived, and extraordinarily dangerous invasion by Russia of another peaceful country on its border.
Well, it is setting a bad example. Do you have any concerns about what message this might be sending to a country like China?
Well, what China is learning is the same lesson that Russia is learning. You don't go invade a neighboring country without consequences. Russia is facing some very severe long-term sanctions that will significantly harm the Russian economy immediately, and then even more so over time. And also Putin and his oligarchs, their money that is stashed outside of Russia is almost certain to be confiscated, locked up. The Russian banks are going to be locked up out of the world process of banking and clearing of transactions all around the world, with a very severe consequence. For China, this is a moment for China to observe the rallying of the free nations, the democratic nations of the world, where democracy is the way rather than an autocracy. The rallying of those countries to support each other at a time of very serious challenge, in this case, a challenge by Putin to the world order of free nations deciding for themselves where they want to go, what they want to be, rather than having their will imposed upon them by an invader.
So we're seeing the rallying, the coming together, the unity, the sanctions. But at what point may we or may we not see actual protection for Ukraine?
The United States government, for the last several years, and even more so in the last year, has been very active in supporting Ukraine with defensive military weapons. Those weapons are now being deployed against the invading Russians in a very one-sided conflict. Nevertheless, the weapons are there for Ukraine to be able to militarily fight back. Also, the United States has provided $1 billion loan guarantee for Ukraine to be able to finance the necessary humanitarian as well as military operations within their country. The other NATO countries are also stepping up their involvement in providing weapons to Ukraine. The Baltics have sent weapons. Simultaneously, NATO is beefing up, expanding its defensive posture on the eastern NATO countries. The United States has sent additional brigades into the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, including very advanced F-35 fighter jets. Poland has received some several thousand additional American troops now in Poland, as well as Romania and Bulgaria. This is also action that is undertaken by the other NATO countries, France and the United Kingdom doing similarly. So it's all of the NATO countries are preparing to be defensive. Keep in mind what Putin has said. Putin has basically called for the destruction of NATO. He has said that NATO forces must be removed from those countries that border Russia. Those are the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. That's a non-starter. That's not going to happen. And so my concerns are not only what is happening today with a massive invasion into a peaceful, non-threatening Ukraine, my concerns also go to what Putin has very clearly demanded, and that is the withdrawal of NATO forces from the Eastern European countries. That will not happen.
Congressman, I know you have a unique historical perspective here. You traveled to Ukraine yourself in 2019. You met with President Zelensky. Now, a lot of Ukrainians were surprised by how quickly this escalated. Did you have any clue? Did he have any clue at this point that this attack was going to happen within a mere matter of years?
It's been very clear for the last 9 months that Russia was going to position its military might on the border of Ukraine. There's been no secret about that. The question is always, was that to threaten and to change the political dialogue, or was it to actually invade? To deal with that political dialogue, the United States and other Western countries, the European Union and NATO countries, have been very, very clear that there would be severe sanctions should this move beyond a political dialogue and diplomacy to military action. And so that's been the basic structure of the situation until the last several weeks, in which it became very clear that Putin was not going to engage in a meaningful diplomatic solution, but rather push forward to a military action. Nevertheless, the United States, NATO, and the European Union continue to work diligently for a diplomatic solution, including visits to Russia by the leaders, by Macron and France, Germany, and as well as the United States diplomatic from the State Department. All of that has failed. And now we have a war. We have the first significant military war in Europe since 1939. The normal order of way in which nations worked to resolve disputes has been pushed aside, and Putin has picked up Hitler's solution, which is an invasion of a neighboring country.
Is there anything about this conflict right now, from your perspective, that you would like Americans to better understand about what's going on?
I think there are several things that America needs to recognize, and that is we cannot turn our backs on what is going on in the world. We did that in World War I, and eventually we were drawn into World War I. We did the same thing in World War II. We said that was a European problem, and we turned our backs on it until the United States was attacked. And here we are once again. We cannot turn our backs on what is happening in the world. Simultaneously, while this war is going on, there is an existential threat to all of us, and that's called climate change. And so we're going to have to keep our eye on several critical issues that are going on simultaneously. Certainly, this war in Ukraine and how it might spin out of control needs to be very carefully monitored. The United States and all of us need to be aware of how important it is that the United States stands tall and firm for democracy and for the order of law and rule of law for nations, as well as for the countries themselves. Secondly, we cannot turn our eyes away from climate change. And simultaneously, here in the United States, we must remember that our democracy is at risk today in our own country. Trump and his allies are setting up a mechanism for the overthrow of the normal American transfer of power in the 2024 election, as well as in the 2022 midterm elections, as voting rights are being lessened throughout the United States, or at least in almost 30 states in the United States. So we've got a very serious multitasking for Americans. And of course, all of us just want to get on with our own lives, make sure our kids are getting a great education, and that we have the necessary income to support our families. So yes, America, we're going to have to throw our shoulders back. We're going to have to stand tall, stay firm, keep in mind that this is an extraordinary, important moment in the ebb and flow of world history. If we're not there as the strongest country in the world, standing for democracy, standing for human rights, and standing for the rule of law in which nations settle their disputes, not with guns and artillery, but rather with diplomacy, dialogue, and ultimately resolution of whatever those differences might be. So we got a big task as Americans. I have great confidence in Americans. We've been through many, many very difficult times in the past, and we're finding ourselves one now that is multifaceted.
All right, Congressman John Garamendi, senior member of the Armed Services Committee. We appreciate you sharing your perspective with us here on CBS News Bay Area.
Thank you, Ann.